Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? Thursday, August 9th, 2018. Time for yet another show. Everything's still proceeding apace. Nothing we appear to be able to do about it just yet. Tapping our fingers on the desk, waiting patiently for Robert Mueller to get through with his work and for the November elections to arrive. I guess those are our only tickets out of here at this point. Noticed something this morning that I thought was very interesting. Daniel Dale still doing his, mostly, I think, thankless work. Although, thanks, Daniel. There you go. There goes all your thankless work down the drain. Of the thankless work of cataloging, really, counting, documenting, rebutting, debunking, disproving, whatever, the constant stream of lies coming out of Donald Trump. And, it's a tough thing to keep up with. He's doing the most comprehensive work on it that I am aware of. But that is because I am not doing any exploration or research whatsoever to find out whether anyone else is doing a better job. He's just making it easy by distributing it all on Twitter. This morning, a thread comes my way. How old are the tweets? Are the tweets morning tweets, or are they being restricted? Yep, morning tweets. Okay, so one that caught my eye this morning. I mean, there's a big thread, and I might as well you could just do a whole show reading his threads about Trump's lies. But the one that really jumped out at me today, and I guess he meant for us to jump out at us. 2 serious Trump lies that got no attention. Okay, he got me. He said he is, quote, surrounding our country, unquote, with missile interceptors. And that previous presidents refused to do this because other countries got mad and the presidents buckled. Experts, of course, say neither one is true. But I don't know in what. Well, here's the quote, I guess, from, where was he? So he's speaking at one of the rallies. We make the greatest missiles. God, it drives me crazy. We make the greatest missiles. We have the anti-missile missiles that shoot down missiles many, many miles away in the sky, like a needle in a haystack. This is the guy in 1984 insisted that he should be dispatched for the Reagan administration to negotiate on behalf of the United States with the Soviets missile defense, strategic arms limitations talks. He wanted to be the nuclear weapons negotiator, to negotiate with the Soviet Union. Gorbachev, you gotta understand, we can shoot down missiles with anti-missile missiles many, many miles away. Oh, is that your command of the technical aspects of the program are admirable, Mr. Trump? Yes, many, many miles away. You know what a mile is? You guys are probably metric. Do you understand? We can blow you up many kilomiles further than you can. And yeah, so, okay, that's what he's spending his time on. And plus, of course, he now insists. And I guess you could make the argument that it's harmless because he's telling a bunch of idiots who don't know any better, I'm surrounding the country with anti-missile missiles. They're missiles that'll make the other missiles miss our missiles. He actually makes that slip at some point. I'm making this country safe. And, who can say different if you're from wherever he's holding his rally? I don't see any missile systems out here, but he's surrounding the country. They're obviously on the outline, the borders of the country. And they're shooting everything down. We're totally safe. And the other presidents aren't doing it because other countries are complaining. So he says, we're surrounding our country with them, by the way, if you don't mind. Remember what other countries said? No, because they didn't say it. We don't want you to put defensive missiles, and this is actually what he says, defensive missiles and missiles, both of those horribly mangled words, in your country. You don't want to put us, explain that to me, please. Remember? No, because it didn't happen. They used to get angry when we would put defensive missiles, anti-missile missiles in our country, and so we wouldn't do it. And then I'm sure into the we have the stupidest politicians in this country. They don't know what they're doing. I think he's thinking of it used to be the objection to anti-missile systems. There used to be the ABM treaty, anti-ballistic missile treaty, when in the early days of the development of this technology, the Soviets would object. They would say, well, if you're able to shoot down our missiles and we're unable to shoot down your missiles, then the mutually assured destruction that keeps us in this sort of détente with respect to the nuclear threat is undermined. And who knows how that could destabilize things. And the United States, for the most part, said, okay, thanks very much. Interesting to know that the Soviets are opposed to our, operating defensive systems. That doesn't really stop us from doing anything. And of course, on top of all that, the system doesn't work all that well. And between that and, maybe if any of you were, in, I guess, high school or even college age during that phase of the Reagan administration and the Star Wars proposals, and you took statistics, then you would realize pretty quickly, even a 99% effective system, there's so many warheads coming in a full-scale nuclear exchange that taking out 99% of them still leaves 90% of the population dead with the misses of the missiles. But that was what actually was going on. And the idea that other presidents said, I was about to surround the country with an impenetrable wall to defend us against everything, but I didn't do it because I'm an evil, and I'm sure he would have thought, you're a Soviet spy. Of course, ridiculous. But I don't know. It's almost borderline between telling a bunch of idiots who don't know anything anyway a lie about what he's doing and not doing and what other presidents have or haven't done, / clear and present danger to the national security and the continuation of American democracy. I'm not sure which side of the line it falls on, but I'm in favor of proactively taking him out of office so that he doesn't present either of those threats. But just one of dozens, and I guess Daniel Dale also notes that he has broken his records for how many lies in a week, and his top 4 most lies told in a week figures come in the last 7 weeks. So yes, the lying, the misdirection, complete confusion about all basic facts that govern the country and the world, increasing and at their peak. So with that in mind, we continue to take a look around the news elsewhere. Greg Dworkin waiting patiently. How's the coffee there in the waiting room? Still
Absolutely
warm?
Fantastic.
Excellent.
The entire room is green. And then when I have the coffee, actually all the other colors come. It's really kind of an amazing thing in the morning.
That is some good coffee. I won't tell you.
Great
we
coffee.
Secretly replaced Greg's coffee with peyote.
Listen, I will tell you something.
Okay.
I think this whole Donald Trump riff was based on a misunderstanding. I think he heard that there were SALT talks, and he figured there were negotiations about opening up Mexican grills and taco trucks.
Maybe.
And he just went nuts.
They were supposed to be on every corner.
Yeah, exactly. And, the one who's was really egging him on about this recently was Laura Ingraham.
Oh, yeah?
Well, I don't know if you
tell.
saw what she said or heard what she said. I don't hear what she says because I don't watch her on Fox News, but I saw what she said because somebody wrote the words down.
Yeah.
And it says, Andrew Lawrence here tweeting, Laura Ingraham, quote, "The America we know and love doesn't exist anymore.
Oh, well.
Massive demographic changes have been foisted on the American people, and they are changes that none of us ever voted for and most of us don't like. This is related to both illegal and legal immigration."
Yes, I did.
And of course, this has a lot to do, and that naturally she has a picture of Ocasio-Cortez's candidacy up there. So she's talking about all the people we don't want in this country, and she shows Ocasio-Cortez.
You mean, yeah, okay. Right. Well, I did see that.
And she's trying to make the point that most of Ocasio-Cortez's candidates lost, and so most of us are rejecting her and her Latino heritage, I guess she means.
I see.
By the way they voted, which is really kind of an interesting.
So then we did get a chance to vote.
Yeah.
Huh.
So Seth Maskett, political scientist, says the problem isn't that monsters like Laura Ingraham exist or can speak their hatred. It's that they are given a platform and a salary to do so.
Yes,
which is a problem. And it was nasty enough so that Connor Friedersdorf felt obligated to write an article about it in the Atlantic.
Okay.
Laura Ingram's loss of love for America. I included that picture of her with the Nazi salute at the RNC convention, just so people don't forget this isn't an accident. The Fox News host cites an increase in the number of illegal immigrants as the reason for her diminished patriotism.
You're not supposed to be able to diminish somebody's patriotism just because. All right. Well, so she never was one, yeah.
From Virginia to California, we see stark examples of how radically in some ways the country has changed. And Friedersdorf goes on to talk about what he loves about America and patriotism. And obviously he says Ingram's love of country was significantly grounded in its demographic makeup.
I guess so.
Right? But lest anybody worry that America won't have enough patriots left, Ingram is thankfully wrong when she implies that most of us feel as she does. Gives, of course, data saying that's not true and ends with God bless America. But it was particularly vile, and that's why I thought it was particularly worth bringing to your attention.
It is, and illustrating it with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You mean she has a heritage that disturbs you? I mean, there's no question about where she was born or citizenship or anything of the sort. Also, you're wrong about our getting to vote on that stuff. But I was struck by, the same thing, I think, but also at another level, just the idea that, underlies her whole thing. Well, we didn't even have anything to say about it. Yeah, people in the world decided to move around from one place to another. What do you want to vote about?
One other thing to mention, she probably doesn't know this, Laura Ingram, but I thought I would mention it to you. Mm-hmm. Puerto Ricans are citizens.
Yeah. Well, don't just, you'll just get her all riled up and crazy. Yeah, that, of course, they've never accepted that. And I mean, even before Trump, you could walk out on the street any day and interview people about whether or not Puerto Ricans were Americans, and 90% of them would get it wrong. Yeah, that's a little bit of a problem. And you know what? A lot of them were kind of like, you know what? Screw those people. I go my own way. As long as the government knows which country I belong in, that's fine with me. I'm never going to correct everybody's misperceptions about these things, but it's getting a little more necessary.
Mm. Well, let's just see where things stand here. So we have Frank Luntz on ABC saying, and I quote, GOP unlikely to maintain the majority in Congress.
That's good.
The political strategist and pollster Frank Luntz says the only way Republicans maintain the congressional majority in the midterms is if they cater to two types of voters, the pro-Trump wing of the party as well as independents and swing voters. What an amazing concept here. We've been talking about this. Luntz is making the case you can't just go for your base and expect to win. You have to pull in independents and swing voters.
Okay.
I wonder where we've heard that before.
I don't know.
The problem for the GOP is they have to win both of these groups. And, of course, he goes on to say that the bigger problem is, you can't do both at the same time.
No.
They are two different constituencies with two different attitudes towards Donald Trump within the Republican Party. And so the president's campaigning efforts aren't always helpful.
No? All right.
Luntz thinks that Trump should go to West Virginia.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
That would be a good idea.
Forever?
That would help. But not necessarily in these really close races. And the funny thing, of course, is Trump is taking credit for Troy Balderson's perhaps not yet conceded victory in Ohio 12, which is incredibly narrow. And most of the nonpartisan analysts looking at this are saying, actually, the reason it was close was Trump. He isn't the reason that Balderson won. He is the reason that Balderson didn't win by 12 or 15 points, which is what he should have.
Okay. Well, then I'd say go wherever.
So go wherever. That's what I say.
Yeah.
Nothing bodes well is a quote from Robert Costa and Josh Dawsey writing in the Washington Post. Lackluster election results spark debate over Trump's midterm role. And they talk about all of that. He thinks that if he shows up, it's a giant red wave. Just like he thinks that if he just talks to Mueller, he'll convince Mueller to buy 666 Fifth Avenue. And also, by the way,
that's not a bad
will
idea.
Also convince Mueller to enroll in Trump University. And by the way, also convince Mueller that the whole thing's a witch hunt.
Right.
If they would just let him do it, they're shackling him. If he would just unleash his, superpowers of convincing people that up is down everything would work.
Yeah. Use your defensive mishes.
So the razor-thin margin, as this article points out, in Ohio 12, comes in a district Trump won by 11 points, and that Republicans have held since 1983. It's been redistricted, I think, so it's not exactly easy to compare what it was then, but it's essentially since 1935 it's been a Republican district.
All right. Ohio. We can understand this.
And Ohio, as Kyle Kondik, who's the expert, writing it from the University of Virginia, from the the Crystal Ball, Larry Sabato shop, has pointed out, the thing about Ohio is the problem that Democrats have had in winning in 2016 in particular, but just in terms of trends, and that is the rural areas of Ohio are trending red, while the suburban areas and the urban areas in Ohio are trending blue. But as we saw very clearly on Tuesday night, there are more rural area voters. And so if everybody comes out equally, the Republicans win. The reason this was a razor-thin margin is because the turnout was higher in the Democratic areas than the Republican areas. But in a place like that, given what I just said, you can't just run to your own base and expect to win. Just like Franklin said, you have to get the independents and the swing voters.
Where are they?
Which, by the way, they're in the suburbs.
Oh, all right. I'm just checking.
Soccer moms may be a tired old cliche, but the fact of the matter is that they're basically the deciders this year in the election.
Oh, no. Not
and that's why this was a tie.
Well,
Call them something else if you want to, but it's the same demographic.
Yeah. Well, maybe they weren't paying attention during the campaign because of the World Cup.
There was a game. They couldn't. But, these are the voters that are going to wind up making the difference here. Here's another one, this one from the New York Times, and this is Alex Burns. Republicans' biggest tactical problem is the huge number of open house seats they're defending. And I'm going to take this from 20,000 feet down to the local level, which I think will be of interest to you.
Okay. Slowly,
Republicans' biggest I always say things will be of interest. I have no idea if David's bored of what I'm saying, but, I'll pretend for the sake of radio that he's interested. Republicans' biggest tactical problem is the huge number of open house seats that they are defending. Huge. And after that, they're very worried about a number of sluggish and unprepared incumbents who haven't faced real races in years. And Democrats have noticed.
Oh, well, good.
Right? Here's another quote from the piece. The story writes itself when you've got an incumbent who's never gotten a bill passed into law, who hasn't looked his constituents in the eye in years, hasn't done a real town hall in years, and people are sick and tired of paying somebody to do nothing.
Yeah. Well, none of that stuff was in the box. What did you want me to do?
Exactly right. Then we have another a political analyst by the name of Lindsey Graham.
That guy.
Looking at the House situation here, he says there's a real likelihood they not only win the House, they win it by 10 or 12 more seats than they need. Voicing publicly what many Republican officials have begun to acknowledge privately this summer.
In golf outings around the country.
Yes, Mr. Graham said, a Democratic takeover was no sure thing, noting that in the era of Trump, things can change, for good or for bad. But we're bleeding among women, and the enthusiasm factor for Democrats is worth 7 or 8 points, and sometimes more. He said, using political jargon to describe just how deep into Republican territory the battlefield might stretch.
Okay.
And he adds, if I was a House guy in an R plus 10 or less seat, I'd be getting on the phone and raising money and putting a sign on my dog.
What sign?
I don't know, one of those sandwich signs, I suppose.
Like, kick me or something. What kind of sign are you talking about? Vote for my dad?
But everybody is getting the idea here that, you know what? The Republicans actually are at risk for losing the House. It's actually real.
It's because they're putting signs on dogs. That doesn't work.
Right.
Dogs don't vote either.
Yeah, any more than lawn signs.
That's crazy.
Or another quote from that Alex
my
Burns
dog
piece
just put a sign on my lawn.
That would do it. Why don't you put your lawn on the dog? Veteran party lawmakers have an increasingly bleak view of their prospects in the House, and some fear Democrats could seize the chamber by a solid margin. And then they name some names.
Seize that chamber.
Talking about some of the people who are particularly at risk, and they mention the fact that with guys like Chris Kobach running, that just makes things even worse.
With guys like Chris Kobach, who needs what? Oh, I don't know.
And what happens is that since they have infinite amounts of money, some of the marginal seats just wind up getting unfunded.
Cool.
Right? And what other things happen is that people in your own hometown get a little tired of you, for example, running on a platform that says that I oppose my entrenched opponent because they never have town meetings and they're totally unresponsive to the constituency, as Dave Bratt did when he upset Eric Cantor. And then once in office, never having a town hall and refusing to talk to their constituency.
Well, yeah, you should deliver on that. I thought that's interesting. The first part of the sentence made me think like there's fatigue about running that way, and so people shouldn't run that way. But I think everybody's always angry about unresponsive representation.
Abigail Spanberger, a Democratic nominee for a House seat in Virginia, speaking to supporters this month in Spotsylvania. She may make history of a different sort in a district that's been deeply Republican for decades. And the topic is, in Virginia, women form an insurgency to try to topple Republican Dave Bratt. And now they're all up in his grill.
Does it say that?
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
You know why it says that?
No.
Because there's a separate story from back in January. Representative Dave Bratt, the women are in my grill no matter where I go, and that's why he's not holding town meetings.
They are in my grill.
In a video taken Saturday at a meeting in the Richmond suburbs in a safely Republican district, Bratt said, since Obamacare and these issues have come up, the women are in my grill no matter where I go. They come up, when's your next town hall? And believe me, it's not going to give positive input, and that's his excuse for not holding town halls.
Okay. Well, that's a bad excuse for it.
Except that he ran on holding town halls.
Yeah. Oh, well, then it's doubly bad.
So
he's a brat.
A group that didn't exist at the time Eric Cantor existed was called the Liberal Women of Chesterfield County, and they're organizing, and they're trying to defeat this guy.
Well, that is a good idea if you are upset with him or his grill.
Right. For Republicans, Mr. Bratt's race is a bulwark in their defensive perimeter, the kind of district they must win to keep control of the House. The area's mix of affluent suburbs and conservative rural stretches resembles the Ohio district. Hey, we were just talking about that. Where a Republican candidate in a House special election on Tuesday, Troy Balderson, clings to a narrow lead by his fingernails. For Democrats, Ms. Spanberger's candidacy represents a test of the breadth and effectiveness of their coalition of newly emboldened female voters aghast at President Trump's White House tenure and the ability of fed-up women to build an insurgency of their own.
Interesting.
I think it's ironic humorous, Ms. Spanberger said of Mr. Bratt being on the receiving end of a rebellion. I read it as a cautionary tale of coming into the scene saying you want to do things differently and then not really doing things differently.
I would caution against that.
Virginia's 7th Congressional District, which is what we're talking about here, runs from the exurbs of Washington to counties south of Richmond, roughly tracking the decisive battles of the Civil War. In some of the more rural stretches, Confederate flags still hang from front porches, but far more common are the booming commercial and housing developments closer to Richmond that are eating into what was once a conservative redoubt. 2 counties hug the Commonwealth's capital are likely to determine the outcome. Henrico, is that how it's pronounced? Where Ms. Spanberger lives and which increasingly leans Democratic, and Chesterfield.
Yeah, I have heard it a couple ways. There's a correct way, and I am still not up to speed on Henrico.
There's a correct way, and I'm from New Jersey. So
yeah, right. I mean, yes, I'm from a different state, Northern Virginia.
That's right.
Yes.
One-time Republican stronghold showing signs of change, it says here. The area's had a surge of college-educated women. Forgive the pronunciation, but Henrico has gained about 65,000 residents since 2000. Chesterfield has added 82,000.
Yeah.
And as the numbers have increased over the fortunes of Democrats, signs of change in Chesterfield were evident in the governor's race last year. Ralph Northam won the county by 700 votes.
All right. Henrico is the claim to correct pronunciation.
Henrico?
Henrico, yes.
Thank you. So Mr. Bratt's hardly alone. There's places in Texas, California, Iowa, Pennsylvania, New York, and other states where the swelling suburbs have chipped away at the rural Republican strongholds. Republicans are in the same dilemma Democrats were when people started to become dissatisfied with Obama, said Quentin Kidd, the director of the Wason Center for Public Policy at Christopher Newport University, which conducts surveys of Virginia voters. They couldn't get enough of the benefits of enthusiasm for Obama, and they can't get rid of the baggage.
All right. Well,
right?
do you want me to
Enthusiasms.
Yeah, but you could run as a Republican and say, well, Trump's great, so vote for me. And that doesn't translate.
Right.
And then Trump isn't great because he did these things. Yeah, and I'm blaming you because you'll enable him. And so, it's a very difficult run for House people because they don't really know what to do. And that's especially true if, as you have pointed out, they got there in the first place because they were a candidate in a box that didn't know anything about the issues, so they can't run on the issues.
Yes. Well, that is problematic. That was always the drawback of it, and it used to be that it works when you have people at the top of the leadership who hand out talking points and say these things. But as you were pointing out, the dismal failure of the Paul Ryan speakership has left them without direction.
And without cover.
Yes. Well, he's no help to them whatsoever.
Exactly.
And this is a very interesting description of the phenomenon in this in this article. But actually, the phenomenon I was thinking of was all these Republicans who made so much money and remained conservatives, but they made all their money developing these suburbs.
Or stealing it.
Yes. Well, sure.
We'll get to Chris Collins.
Okay. Yes, that's true too. But they made so much money building these developments that the suburbanites are moving into and encroaching in. It's interesting. It's not working fast enough to eliminate. I made my money on a development,
and now all these Democrats moved into them, and now they don't want me to allow me to build more. And I'm really upset about it. I'm running for city council.
Yes.
That happens in our area all the time.
It happens everywhere. It happens here too. But then the people come out and say, "Well, I now live here and I get to vote here." And you know what? You guys kind of make me ill.
And you're disturbing the whole rural area here. And you want to build in the forest and in the river. And,
yes.
and we don't need a 17th mall. And I'm voting against you.
That is true. And it's time for us to take off for 2 minutes and return after that. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. That works pretty well as a reintroduction. I guess the music is a little screwed up because I forgot to start it on time. But welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Greg Dworkin's still with me, whether the music's working or not. Let's pick things up where we left off. Republicans are in the wrong about everything.
David and I were talking on the break here, and I was mentioning my own area here, which is a exurb of New York City, but still a rural area. We still have cow farms. And they make great ice cream because that's what dairy farms do in the summer. And what's happened is that a lot of residents have moved here, and the town has grown tremendously compared to 30 years ago when we first moved here. And the Republican-leaning builders and developers have put together places for people to live, and so folks move into it. That's what they wanted. Mm-hmm. But the folks moving in are from New York City, and they tend to be Democrats.
Yes.
And even worse, they're young families, and so they have school kids. So now you have families who actually are interested in seeing taxes go up so that the school system could be funded, which is anathema to the people who built the developments.
Yes. It's really kind of funny. They seem to write themselves out of history that way. I wish it would happen faster, but you know how history is.
Yeah,
but we have the same story.
But it's a definite phenomenon. And so in this article talking about the Virginia 7th District, it says, many of the women who are organizing against Dave Bratt have been engaged in their communities. How? Through school groups, locally based organizations.
Yes.
So they're organizers. But now they're involved in campaigns for the first time, but it's not like they've never been involved in organizations before. They're not novices in organizing.
Right. Well, we have very much the same thing here. And even though we're a few, we're a little further from the New York area than than you are in Connecticut, it's still very much the same thing. That northeastern New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania folks are the ones filling in the suburbs that our Republican developers are building. You saw it here in the description, that the district stretches from what they called the Washington exurbs down to Henrico County, the Richmond exurbs. And the people who are filling in those ex-urban communities are moving in generally from somewhere else. They battle constantly, though, like you said, over the change in the neighborhood, which is, I guess, hearkening in a way back to almost to what Laura Ingraham was talking about. But here we're not talking about necessarily a different racial composition, but certainly different demographics. And it's interesting. So the wealthy landowners develop the land and sell 5,000 units on what used to be cow pasture, and then all of a sudden in move 5,000 families who are interested in, like you said, a strong school system. One of the things that
so now you have 10,000 votes.
Yeah, one of the things that our developers tend to do around here is they'll build the neighborhoods and then not build the infrastructure that goes with it.
Leave that for the towns, and then the towns have to fund it, and then you have a big fight about it. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then you have the vote, and the big developer who wants low taxes votes no, but the 5,000 people who moved in said we want firehouses and schools.
Well, yeah, as it turns out,
just build some, man.
The budget for most of these small towns like mine, about 80% of the budget is the school.
Yeah.
So, you have that. Again, this article talking about Virginia, they fuse social and political activities with meetings called to write postcards for candidates over drinks, over coffee, hat knitting sessions.
Hat knitting.
What kind of hats?
Like pink guess. Hats? Yeah, that would be my guess.
And broader-based activities to get out the vote broken down largely on a school district level. And so this whole thing about having school-age kids and school district level stuff is like it matters a whole lot, especially if you're talking about a woman's revolution.
Yes, that will be a big deal.
Everybody knows everybody from the PTA. Or PTO, as it might be called.
Yes, that's true. It's a PTO here, too. I don't know where it's still PTA. Harper Valley, I guess.
Well. Over dinner at the Shaved Duck, a restaurant that was not open, Mr. Bratt was first elected, and I might add probably would not let Sarah Huckabee Sanders eat there. Ms. Stewart Connor said she was so shy that at first she couldn't bring herself to even attend a meeting. Now she finds herself working on the effort several days a week. They said the group really got people together to get into politics instead of crying and drinking about the election.
Well, that's good, because that's all. Crying and drinking is what goes on in the bars where they still support Trump, I guess.
As our friend Tim Lang, Meteor Blade, says all the time, don't mourn, organize.
Right. Well, he's right in that. It's Shaved Duck. That's okay. Whatever.
Along with other women, group members have gone to events for Mr. Bratt and tried to get in his grill.
What?
I give him credit for putting a target on Dave Bratt's back. Mr. Bratt no longer widely publicizes campaign events, instead requiring people sign up in advance. He declined several requests for an interview.
Well, all right.
Right.
This guy's not around at the Shaved Duck, eh?
Yeah, there you have it. Now,
very interesting.
Bratt still has, he's definitely considered to be the favorite. It would be an upset. But the fact that, there's a race at all is really the story. All right, so just quickly going through other stories I think that are of interest. Josh Dorner notes on Twitter that Giuliani's negotiating with himself and with Bob Mueller by video and TV. He told Axios, Jonathan Swan, Axios is really turning out to be the outlet for what Republicans think. They had an article today about how well Giuliani's doing all of this because Republicans agree with him. Giuliani told Axios' Jonathan Swan that there's two topics the president's lawyers want to rule out in order to agree to a Trump sit-down. One, why Trump fired FBI Director Comey, and two, what Trump said to Comey about the investigation of former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn.
Yeah, sure. Right, okay. No problem. Come on in.
So Dorner says, the Trump team's legal argument basically boils down to one thing. Mueller can't ask the president about his crimes because then the president would be forced to lie about them.
Right, or confess them, which is also a possibility.
Right. So I point this out from YouGov, which has a poll recently on this. Republicans see the FBI's investigations into Trump and Manafort as witch hunts, but overall, Americans are more likely to see them as legitimate investigations. Just again, a reminder that if you ask Republicans what they think of Trump or what they think of Giuliani and whether or not Fox News is a good news station, you're going to get an answer. It's got nothing to do with what the majority of the country thinks.
That is true.
So you really don't have to publish it as a breaking news story. Trump voters still like Trump. Okay,
Oh,
fine.
yeah, well, we're sick of that.
What about the other 75% of the country?
Well, I don't know. Who cares? Axios doesn't cater to them, apparently.
They do not. But one of the things I thought was interesting, I mentioned this on Twitter this morning, is that if and when we take the House and maybe the Senate, how are they going to adjust? Is it all going to be, we talked to Trump voters about loss of power, so we can talk to you about how they feel. I mean,
Maybe.
are they actually going to start talking to non-Trump people?
I don't, Axios, you mean? Them in particular? They will,
exactly.
I don't know. I imagine they'll talk to Republican operatives in Washington, I guess, and continue to do that. I don't know if the Axios is big
Well,
on
New York Times is
leaving
still going to go
DC.
to the West Virginia.
Yes, they like to leave and say, hello, we've made it all the way here from New York.
Yes.
And,
Where can I get my monocles serviced? Right.
Exactly. Where Axios just likes to, whoever I see at the Roslyn Station Starbucks on the way in, I'll interview.
So Mike DeBonis pointed out months and months ago, overheard in the speaker's lobby, do you know how many millionaires I've made in Buffalo the past few months? Said Representative Chris Collins on a cell phone.
That sounds familiar.
Ear reach of everybody. And 19 months later, Representative Collins has been arrested.
Yes, well, there you go. One more made, this time by the police.
And I see this
great story.
comment on Twitter to that by Scott Murdoch, and I'll mention it because it just fits in nicely to the Dave Bratt piece here. So now, instead of being known as Chicken Collins due to his fear of holding a town hall meeting, he can now be Crooked Chicken Collins. But I guess it's a thing that, like, Republicans don't want to hold town meetings.
Yeah, well, again, sort of, I don't know whether I would say candidate in a box thing necessarily. Well, one, the town hall thing, if it's not in your box, when it arrives, you won't hold it. But a lot of these guys also, we're now at the stage where a significant number of relatively newly elected Republican members, their experience with town hall meetings, to the extent they have any, was reading about how the Democrats they defeated were beaten to a pulp at the town hall meetings over Obamacare, et cetera, 2009, 2010, 2011, et cetera. They grew up with the idea, so to speak, politically grew up in Congress anyway, with the idea that town hall meetings were dangerous. And remember, for a while, not that long ago, the prevailing sentiment in discussions in the House Republican conference meetings was that your life was in danger at town hall meetings. The violent leftists were coming to kill you at these meetings, and don't have them, or have security, or control
and of course,
entry.
the irony of the fact is that they were elected because town hall meetings over Obamacare.
Right. Yeah, they used them to threaten the Democrats there. And to
so they
rile
well
up
know how town hall meetings
anger.
work.
Yeah, they have no experience with town hall meetings where views are exchanged, thoughts are expressed, and people come away with a better understanding of the other side. That's not their view of a town hall meeting. They are confrontational. They are professional wrestling style cage matches and nothing else. So no wonder they don't want to have any of them. Constituents are dangerous, dangerous people that could actually turn violent against you. And at the very least, the only reason they're interested in showing up is to work at getting you out of office. People who support you don't come to them. Those you have rallies for.
Right. So Niels Lusnowski, reporter, notes, today's a good reminder of why it's useful to have credible candidates running even in races you aren't going to win. You never know when the other guy's going to be arrested.
That is true. And
right? So if you don't field the candidates, you can't
widespread.
win. You can't beat, something with nothing. You got to have something.
That is true. You got to have somebody on the ballot. And if you think lightning can't strike twice, maybe not in the same place, that's the idea, but it can strike all over the place. It doesn't have to be in the same place. Collins is going to pull some other people in with him. I don't know if they're all going to go down the way he goes down, but it was a point of pride with him to share those insider trading tips with anyone who'd listen, including several other members of his committee. They would be the committee with jurisdiction over FDA drug trials. So it's particularly egregious. And yesterday I saw reports that he had talked some 4 or 5 other members of the committee into buying this ridiculous Australian immunotherapeutics group.
He got Tom Price to buy stock.
Yeah, and he's gone.
Well, the thing is, what about those other folks?
Yeah, well, we're going to begin to learn their names.
Is this an insider trading scandal that actually affects more than just Chris Collins?
It is.
And is it something like the banking scandal?
Not that
that's
big.
going to wind up affecting a whole bunch of members.
But there were 4 or 5 names out there yesterday being mentioned as people he had talked into making these purchases. And, of course, I wonder if this will change their behavior. They all figured, well, I'll be in compliance with all the rules and laws. There's official documentation that you have to file with the clerk and with the FEC, et cetera. We're going to find out. We're going to see listed who owns stock in this thing. And there's really almost zero chance that if you're a House Republican, particularly on the same committee as Collins, that you just on your own independently came up with the idea of buying this ridiculous stock.
Right.
And, and then selling it before their FDA trial news came out. I don't know if he tipped anybody off to that, but he got them into buying
there's
stock.
unindicted co-conspirators. It'll be interesting to see who those were.
Oh, we know who they are. I will tell you.
What's that?
I can tell you who they are. We figured out who they were from reading the indictments yesterday.
Yeah.
It says as much. The unindicted co-conspirators, there may be unnamed yet unindicted co-conspirators who may be members of Congress.
Right. But there's other members of the family, of course.
Yes, right. Father-in-law, mother-in-law. Well, they're not married.
Yeah, but it may well turn out that.
More than that. Yeah, it depends how greedy they were. The
well,
greedier they were, the fewer.
I'm saying there may well turn out to be more than that.
Yeah, well, that's true. Yes, I'm wondering whether the greedier they are, the fewer people they would tell about it, or did they tell lots of people and figure they would get some sort of kickback on it? Well, that we have yet to find out. But there are a good 4 or 5 other Republican members of the same committee that he tipped to this stuff, and they put the holdings in their financial disclosure forms. So there's going to be questions.
Let me just quote Mark Twain here. Suppose you were an idiot, and suppose you were a member of Congress. But I repeat myself.
There you are. I mean, I guess I'm glad they're complying with the disclosure. They probably thought they were doing nothing wrong. That's what lies at the heart of this thing. I don't even think Chris Collins thought he was doing anything wrong.
Well, he's making money. What's wrong?
He's a maker, not a taker. This is what makes me part of the people who have the right to be the ruling, governing elite.
It's a funny thing, and this is a process thing, that he was a member of the board of directors for this company.
Yes.
You can't do that in the Senate.
You normally,
but you can do it in the House. It's no rule.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't even realize that was the case. I wondered whether it was the case either that A, nobody noticed, or B, the
House never said you couldn't.
Australian company.
I think it's time they come up to speed here and maybe put a rule in that you can't.
That would be a good idea. It certainly
How do you do that? How does a rule like that get added to House rules?
By resolution. Easy thing to do.
So anybody can offer it?
Oh yeah, sure. Whether they'll let you talk about it and get a vote on it is another story. But the House.
If I were Paul Ryan, I would be encouraging one of my party members to offer this fast.
Yes, not Collins, but
not
maybe
Collins,
one of
but
the
somebody
other
else.
ones.
And so you would say, look, we are here to drain the swamp.
Sure.
This is what we need to do. Otherwise, Democrats are going to be the one to offer it and say, no, we're the ones that are going to drain the swamp, buddy.
Well, the way you handle that, if a Democrat offers it, you just don't bring it to the floor.
Well, then you're a party of corruption. Well,
what you do is you say the House Republican Conference adopts as a conference rule that you're not allowed to serve on we won't give you any committee assignments unless you are divested from these things. You're not allowed to serve as a board of directors member and get a committee assignment. And then you can vote on that this afternoon and then do a press release that says, we're the party that's against that. The Democrats haven't done anything. Then the Democrats will come and pass their own caucus rule saying the same and come to the floor with a House rule that says, regardless of what party you're in, this should be against the rules. And the Republicans will say, well, we're not going to vote on that one, and I now recognize the gentleman from somewhere else who's a Republican. And, hey, guess what I have? I have a rule that says you can't be on the board of directors. Wow, that's a great idea. Let's vote on it. And then Democrats will either vote against it because hypocrisy, but then have a press release in their district that says they voted against it, or vote for it and say, I hate being in the minority. That's what will go on.
But it's a resolution, and then the resolution becomes the House rule until there's a new resolution?
Yes.
And it goes from Congress to Congress? It's not just for this Congress?
In the House, yes. It will just apply to this Congress, and the next Congress will vote on whether or not to just readopt the old rules plus a few changes.
And this becomes part of the old rules, so
yes.
It gets folded into that.
Right, or eventually a sneaky and easy way to get rid of that rule is slip something in that says, we're changing the rules about all these other things, and P.S., I'm deleting line 16 of section 4 of Rule 29.
You see, this is why I like talking to David. You learn stuff like this. This is actually, practically speaking, how this stuff gets done.
Yeah, and undone. So, yeah.
Schoolhouse Rock.
Okay. I need some music.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to leave you, but I'm going to leave you with one story which I thought was interesting. I thought maybe Armando could come on at some point and talk about this, too, from his point of view.
Let's insist.
It's a commentary by Carl Lubsdorff from
that
Dallas Morning News.
Lubsdorff.
And it's entitled, How Trump's Supreme Court Nominee Could Change Voting Rights. And he's talking about Brett Kavanaugh and how hostile he is. But it's a really nice rundown. It may not be the best ever, but it's a nice rundown of all the different ways that the courts have changed recently how we're looking at voting rights. Challenges to Texas restrictive voter ID laws, pending legal battles in Arkansas, Iowa, Missouri, North Dakota, Texas regarding ID there, New Hampshire and their residential laws, which seem to be aimed at college students.
Oh, yes.
Florida. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff. And the point that Lubsdorff is making is that the courts have a tremendous impact on this. And Trump packing the court with his own nominees, including going all the way to the top, is going to have a big impact that people aren't paying enough attention to.
It's hard to believe, but that people aren't paying attention to it. And it will drive Armando crazy. Maybe that will bring him onto the air. Yeah, this is the only thing that matters to him.
Well, I mean is, and rightly so. It's just it's frustrating that people don't pay attention. But it's like climate change. It's incredibly important, and people don't pay attention. They'd rather look at what happens to Chris Collins when he gets arrested.
Yes, well, that's fun and exciting. Arrests are wonderful, and everyone loves them.
Yeah, can't wait till it's Don Jr. and Javanka. So with that, I will leave you. But it's been a good week for Democrats so far, and it's only Thursday. Let's see what else the Republicans screw up with. It's been an awful week for them.
Yeah.
And this Chris Collins thing is going to have reverberations, if nothing else. The two things we talked about this for weeks now. The two things that Democrats are running on. Regardless of how Republicans want. I mean, Democrats are running on health care and corruption. And this Chris Collins story just feeds right into that.
Yes. Well, they cannot help themselves. I think very literally.
Yeah, I think that's true. Take care, and I will talk to you on Monday.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Greg. Why don't you take the rest of the week off and go golfing in Bedminster, New Jersey?
Oh, what a idea.
Yeah, you should go ahead and do that. Buy a golf club while you're out there.
I'll learn how to play golf.
Not a 9-9. I mean the whole facility.
Yeah. I'm a doctor who hasn't a clue as to how to play golf. I agree with the golf is a good way to ruin a good walk.
And that's why you're here on Wednesdays.
I suppose.
If you were
Take care.
a golfer, you wouldn't be. Okay, thanks very much. Take care, Greg. Have a good weekend. Let's catch up on a few things here. And let's see, Armando, the invitation certainly open to you to discuss the court again. And there's so many reasons, of course, to oppose Brett Kavanaugh's nomination, not the least of which, did we discuss this last week? I don't know if I think I maybe clarified things a little more after the discussion on the air, but I wanted to yes, I know we discussed that, but I was trying to make clear for everybody what a huge danger it was to congressional prerogatives to confirm someone to the court who is an executive branch supremacist. And but I sort of I took things out to the, I guess, what would be the logical conclusion of all this stuff. It's hugely dangerous, of course, and contrary to the vision of the founders with respect to the balance of powers as between the branches, that Congress would fold for a nomination made by the executive to the judicial branch, who would uphold the ability of the executive branch to trump anything and everything that the legislative branch does. Over, I guess, late in the week and then over the weekend, the discussion was that, as they dig through Kavanaugh's record, it becomes clearer and clearer, because he says it again and again, and this is, generally speaking, how he made his rise in conservative politics. And it is conservative politics that he's working in here. Yes, he's working in the judicial branch. He's a judge, but it is conservative politics nonetheless. And of course, Armando probably doesn't have to remind you of that the courts, the Supreme Court on down, have become highly politicized. And you are, at this point, at least in the Republican Party, simply placing nominees on the bench who will do the bidding of the party that promoted them. And but it's an extraordinarily dangerous thing institutionally to put someone on the bench who is likely to be, not only they'll be a leading advocate for this stuff, and it's not entirely clear that all the conservatives on the bench feel the same way with respect to the balance of powers as between the executive and legislative branches. And it'd be an open question, and an interesting question to ask whether they feel the same way with respect to the balance of power as between, say, their own branch, the judicial branch, and the executive branch. Or I'm sure they probably feel that way as between the judicial and legislative branches, but that's sort of a traditionally felt thing, going back to, I guess, John Marshall and the concept of judicial review. But it's extraordinarily dangerous for members of Congress to say, I will approve the appointment to the Supreme Court of a justice who allows, in whose view it's entirely allowable and entirely constitutional for the president to ignore duly passed statutes. The singular power of the legislative branch is obviated in that way, and it's stupid. I mean, just plain dumb to give that power to another branch, to kill your branch off. But again, just to bring it back to the theme, if you have populated Congress almost entirely, or at least in majority, with members who have campaigned from that box, and who, in other words, have no understanding of the role of the institution. They know what Congress is. It's that place that pays me for showing up and saying horrific things about Hispanic people, whatever it is that they do with their time as Republican members of Congress. But they don't have any serious worry about the long-term institutional power of the Congress. One, because they haven't been there for very long. Two, because their tenure in the place, short though it's been, almost all of their tenure there has been about acquiescing to one or another party bosses who are usually working in concert with their national party. And when there's a Democratic president, they remember that they need to stand up for institutional power. When there's a Republican president, the job is to knuckle under to them. And the president will tell us what he wants Congress to do, and we will act together as a unified party. And they never develop the sense of independence, or even the idea that such independence would be important, or at least important to give lip service to. A lot of them are such short timers that they don't even understand that you want to give lip service to the independence of the legislative branch, one, for your own sake, and two, because the president could be of another party eventually, and you could maybe want to use that power to limit what they can do. Anyway, on top of all of that, over the weekend, we learned, the Los Angeles Times was the one circulating this story. President Trump's Supreme Court nominee argued presidents should be shielded from all criminal probes, even questioning in criminal matters. They're talking, of course, about Brett Kavanaugh. And all you have to do by way of thought exercise is to ask yourself, well, take it to the extreme. And lots of people were able to jump to this extreme. Oh, yeah, what about murder? Okay, true. Good question. So a president could murder people and not be questioned? And in some cases, people like Kavanaugh might say, well, it would depend why the president feels he needs to do that, if they wanted to take the John Yoo approach to things. Or they could just say flat, yes. At least he can't be questioned about it. Maybe you can do something about it later, maybe you can't, but not while he's sitting as president. So I wanted to talk about a more specific kind of murder. Should a president be shielded from criminal probe if he murders, let's say, Supreme Court justices? Maybe he wants to do it in order to create a vacancy that he can fill with more nominees who also believe the president should be shielded from all criminal probes. Or maybe he just wants to kill you. Is that okay? Is the big question. Well, that's outrageous. Or there would be political constraints on that. People would never stand for it. Or no president would ever conceive of such a thing because Donald J. Trump, all I have to remind you of. Donald J. Trump. What do you think he would and wouldn't distance himself from? Remember, by the way, that he would not disavow the conspiracy theory that either Obama or somebody under Obama's control had murdered Justice Scalia. It's very weird that he showed up in bed with a pillow on his face. I mean, why would there be a pillow on his face? And he wasn't an explicit supporter of the conspiracy theory, but he was asked about it directly, wouldn't disavow it. It's obviously crossed his mind, and who knows? Anything that crosses that warped, dusty old piece of crap, I'd be worried about. That's all I'm saying. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Just taking that 1 minute break. Looking around the internets to find some more information about, as Roll Call's headline puts it, other politicians who held and recently sold stock that got Chris Collins arrested. Tom Price, as Greg mentioned, is among them. Doug Lamborn, a member of Congress, who among those who hold or sold Innate Immunotherapeutics stock. And I ask you, who among you, maybe there are one or two of you out there, who among you were aware of this Australian company, Innate Immunotherapeutics? So aware that you could, some people must have been, people who play the stock market. Surely there's someone who just stumbled upon this as an over-the-counter stock. But you really would have to go out here. If you're a busy person with a full day, a full agenda of working for the people or whatever you claim that you're doing, finding out about Innate Immunotherapeutics would be something of a challenge. At least 6 other politicians, it says here, have recently owned or sold stock in Innate Immunotherapeutics, the Australian company at the center of New York Republican Representative Chris Collins' recent arrest. In 2017, Tom Price sold between $250,000 and $1. These are the ranges that you are given as options to choose to value your various holdings on financial disclosure forms. Why financial disclosure forms don't simply just say, what's the present value of this investment you hold, with the understanding that people would have some wiggle room if you put down it's worth $250,000, and at the time you're filling out the form and the time it takes to process it, it's, the stocks, this is the problem with it. They go up or down, and you can't tell by how much, and you shouldn't be held to account in court if you say it was worth $250,000, and then you find yourself on trial, 6 months later, and hey, the valuation is different. So I guess that's the reason for the range, but the ranges could probably be narrowed. I don't know. Maybe you could debate that, and sophisticated investors would have something to say about that. But for instance, he only has to declare that he holds somewhere between $250,000 and $1. See. and $500,000. Well, that's quite a difference. It's twice as much. Which one is it? But, the price of a stock can double, I guess. I mean, Chris Collins' son's fiance thought she was going to what? She was going to make $250,000, she thought, on a $15,000 investment. So I guess anything's possible. Anyway, Tom Price sold between $250,000 and $500,000 worth of innate immunotherapeutic stock on one occasion, and between $15,000 and $50,000 on another, according to the Office of Government Ethics. Representative Doug Lamborn and his wife also held a stake in innate immunotherapeutics through an IRA, according to the Colorado Republicans' most recent financial disclosure. Republican Representatives John Culberson of Texas and Mark Wayne Mullen of Oklahoma also held stock in the company, according to their financial disclosures. Mullen sits on the Health Subcommittee of the House Energy and Commerce Committee alongside Collins. Both Republican Representatives K. Michael Conaway of Texas and Billy Long of Missouri also purchased innate stock in 2017. The holdings from Long, Mullen, and Collins make 3 GOP members of the Health Subcommittee that have owned and or sold innate stock within the past 2 years. Gee effing whiz. Collins was arrested and indicted on charges related to securities fraud on Wednesday. All these guys now, of course, scrambling and saying, talking to their lawyers, oh my God, Collins told me to buy that. Am I guilty of insider trading? And I guess, probably not. But my guess is, particularly if he told you to buy it and you bought it, like that's not a good idea. You probably shouldn't trade on that. But if you didn't sell it and sell it ahead of time, ahead of that FDA announcement, and thereby defraud your buyers, then you're probably good with respect to being arrested. But honestly, if you bought it off of a tip from him, it is insider trading. It's just not one that we can prove in court if he didn't also tip you off. Though you might wonder why he didn't tip you off. And what is the nature of your relationship with this guy after all? Was he just there to fleece you? How do you feel about that? Maybe you should expel him. Collins' latest sale of innate immunotherapeutics holdings was on June 20th, 2018, and valued between $15,000 and $50,000, according to House Periodic Transactions reports. He bought at least 4 million shares between 2016 and 2018, according to reports. Collins' value in innate went from 25, basically, I'm going to skip the $1 at the end of these things, but remember that there's a dollar tacked on at the end. 25 million to, 25,000. Well, that is weird. It does. How are we supposed to figure this out? It looks like it says 25 million to, then it says to 1 million, which doesn't make any sense. Are they actually trying to say that he owned between 25 million and $1 billion worth of stock? Or was the first one a typo? Was it 25,000 to a million or 250,000? I can't tell. I mean, it's a typo somewhere or another, but okay. 4 million shares. I can't imagine. Well, I don't know. It's like penny stock. I don't know. All right. Well, at any rate, this is no help as a financial disclosure, by the way, if you can't figure out what the numbers are. He serves on the Health Subcommittee of the House Energy and Commerce Committee. Last August, the House Ethics Committee took up an inquiry into Collins and allegations that he had shared non-public information about the company in violation of House rules, standards of conduct, and federal law. So last August, they knew this about him. He's only been arrested this August on those charges. The House, that's an interesting question. What has the House Ethics Committee known about Collins for a year, and what have they done about it? Collins gained personal benefit and provided non-public information to his son, Cameron Collins, who sold nearly $1.4 million of innate immunotherapeutics shares, according to a complaint filed by the Securities and Exchange Commission. Christopher Collins knew or recklessly disregarded that he breached his duty by disclosing this inside information to Cameron Collins, the SEC said. Now, of course, it's an FBI problem, not an SEC, well, not solely an SEC problem. Collins, who represents the suburbs of Buffalo and rural counties in upstate New York, became the first House Republican to endorse Donald Trump's bid for the Republican presidential nomination. The Australia-based biotech company is trying to develop a treatment for multiple sclerosis, which sounds like a nice thing to do. Collins is the company's largest shareholder and serves on its board of directors, attending its meetings by phone. Well, that makes some sense. You shouldn't have to travel all the way to Australia to be paid millions of dollars for nothing. So, there you go. Well, an interesting story, and he's ensnaring others, and it's important to keep an eye on those others and try and figure out what's going on with him. So, yes, there was also the mention, the story of Kavanaugh. Just wanted to put that thought experiment out there for you. Like I said, extraordinarily dangerous for the Congress, despite the obvious advantage in politics. It's essentially writing the Article 1 powers out of the Constitution. If Kavanaugh gets his way, the president can just nullify laws that he doesn't like. And P.S., you can't prosecute him for anything either. And that would include, I guess, logically speaking, although I'd love to see if Kavanaugh could reason his way out of it, besides simply saying, well, no president would ever do that, because this one is a weirdo. But can he forget court packing? Why can't you just get the Supreme Court you want by murdering all the members of the court you don't like and replacing them? After all, you can't be questioned in any criminal matter, so there's not going to be any charges. Does that seem ridiculous? Well, then maybe it's a bad position to hold. How about that? Does anybody think that might be the outcome here? Anyway, not too much more to mention about Kavanaugh himself. However, the other big story of the day does, in fact, involve Kavanaugh, at least tangentially, although some may say he was central to the story. The story I'm talking about, of course, the secret recording. And everything's about secret recording these days, man. Secret recording shows GOP's Devin Nunes saying Rosenstein impeachment would delay Supreme Court pick. And it's an interesting headline. I mean, I think it really obscures the nature of the comments, quite honestly. But okay, do you want them, the Senate, to drop everything and not confirm the Supreme Court justice? Representative Devin Nunes said at a recent fundraiser. What's this all about? This is Phil Helsel's report. Came in, early hours of this morning. I guess it must have been an update because I know I saw it before then. But NBC News' report was, I think, one of the first ones out about this newly emerged recording. Hardline conservative Republicans in the House recently hit a roadblock in their effort to impeach Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein when Speaker Paul Ryan opposed the move. But one of those conservatives, Representative Devin Nunes, gave a different explanation to donors recently when asked why the impeachment effort had stalled. And, the better answer is it's dumb and it makes problems for us that we do not want. But instead, he said, it's because an impeachment would delay the Senate's confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. What an interesting perspective to take. And it does make me wonder for just a moment, maybe I would like to go ahead with this impeachment after all. Since he won't be convicted and removed, then maybe you don't want to play with that fire, certainly. And it certainly wouldn't help the investigation any. Nunes, chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, oddly enough, made the statement in an audio recording surreptitiously made by a member of a progressive group who attended a Republican fundraiser on July 30th in Spokane, Washington. The recording was obtained by the Rachel Maddow Show and was played on MSNBC on Wednesday night. Asked about the impeachment plans, Nunes told a questioner that it's a bit complicated. It's nice that he recognizes things are complicated because we only have so many months left. So if we actually vote to impeach, okay, what that does is that triggers the Senate that then has to take it up, he said on the recording. Well, and you have to decide what you want right now because the Senate only has so much time. Although I think they could probably handle it, quite honestly. He continued, do you want them to drop everything and not confirm the Supreme Court justice, the new Supreme Court justice? The Senate would have to drop everything they're doing and start with impeachment on Rosenstein. And then take the risk of not getting Kavanaugh confirmed, Nunes said. So it's not a matter that any of us like Rosenstein. It's a matter of timing. And like I said, I mean, I don't want to give him any ideas, but it doesn't matter because this one isn't going to come up to complicate things. They're just not going to go ahead with the impeachment for other reasons. This is one of the dumber reasons that could possibly be offered. And of course, you only make yourself look like a colluding bastard by bringing this one up. But quite honestly, if they absolutely wanted to confirm Kavanaugh, they can just go ahead and do it in a matter of a couple of days, getting through the cloture votes. And of course, they wouldn't need 60 votes for cloture anymore. They only need the 50 plus 1, and the majority vote will invoke cloture. And they just have to make sure that everybody is present that day and there aren't any absences, and they can get it done. They'll still have 30 hours post-closure time to burn off. And even in the middle of an impeachment, you can resolve that issue. So it's not a real excuse, but it's interesting that he would go there. Conservative lawmakers have accused Rosenstein, of course, of trying to stymie congressional oversight of special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation, which they shouldn't really have, of alleged interference in the 2016 presidential campaign. The audio of the Spokane fundraiser was obtained by the Maddow Show from a member of the Fuse Washington Progressive Group, about which I know nothing, but it sounds like they did some interesting work here. They paid the $250 entry fee to attend the dinner, so that's $250 down the drain, but I guess they got their money's worth. The event was a fundraiser for Republican Representative Kathy McMorris McRogers McBean. Of course, a spokesperson for her campaign had no comment on the recording. And Nunes' office didn't return calls for comment. I know, you have to say that in your reports. On the evening of July 25th, House Freedom Caucus Chairman Representative Mark Meadows of South Carolina, Jim Jordan, the rape apologist in Ohio, and 9 co-sponsors introduced that resolution to impeach Rosenstein. It does not have the support of House Republican leadership. House Speaker Paul Ryan commented the day after the resolution was introduced, "Do I support impeachment of Rosenstein? No, I do not." Well, that's clear. He also said at that time that if an impeachment resolution were to pass the House, it would tie the Senate into knots and could delay the confirmation of Kavanaugh. All right. So nothing new revealed here. I mean, the fact that Nunes said that in a fundraiser isn't actually very interesting. It's really the other stuff that's most interesting. And what it means when you put it all in context. According to the audio obtained by the show, Nunes said that, "I've said publicly Rosenstein deserves to be impeached." But he also said, the question is the timing of it right before the election. Conservative lawmakers have accused the Justice Department of trying to tar President Donald Trump with the Russia investigation and to downplay the investigation of Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server. I don't know if you heard about that. When she was Secretary of State. The Senate has only a few months to confirm Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court if they want to do it before the November midterms, which, again, they don't have to. They can come back and do it later if they want. Attorney General Jeff Sessions has recused himself from any probe of Russian election interference. Rosenstein appointed Mueller in May of 2017 to investigate Russian interference in, guess what, the 2016 and other elections and other matters after Trump fired FBI Director James Comey. At least they sort of abbreviated the retelling there. Nunes also said that if Sessions won't unrecuse and Mueller won't clear the president, we're the only ones, which is really the danger, according to the audio. And here's the juicy part, right? I mean, we have to keep all these seats. We have to keep the majority. If we do not keep the majority, all of this goes away. He added, I don't know what he's supposed to, like, normally my first read of all of this goes away is, oh, all the investigations go away. That's a good thing if I'm a Republican. But I think he means all of this, meaning our control over the investigation, such as it is, goes away. Apparently referring to, here we are, keeping Republican control of the House in the 2018 midterm elections. Although that's not really what he's referring to either. Look at that. We have to keep all these seats. We have to keep the majority. If we don't keep the majority, all this goes away. Referring to keeping Republican control of the House in the that's what he's talking about, the seats. But the idea of all of this, what's he referring to when we say all of this goes away? The answer is not keeping Republican control, but the benefits of Republican control of the White House. Slightly different thing here. Nunes also appeared to say that if a campaign received and released stolen emails from a foreign government, he used a hypothetical example of McMorris Rogers getting secret information from Portugal, where his ancestors are from, there would be a criminal element to that. Okay, that's actually bad for you. But ultimately, let's say the Portuguese came and brought her some stolen emails and she decided to release those. Okay, now we have a problem, right? Nunes said, because somebody stole the emails, gave them to Kathy, Kathy released them. Well, if that's the case, then that's criminal. Okay, because that's the case. I don't know where you're going with this one. No information has been publicly released from the Mueller probe that anyone in the Trump campaign was involved in the dissemination of stolen Democratic emails during the presidential campaign. Trump has repeatedly denied any collusion took place with Russian operatives and has called the Mueller investigation a witch hunt. Okay. I guess the idea there is Nunes is hanging his hat on, well, no one in the campaign was the one that released this stuff. It was instead passed on to WikiLeaks, and WikiLeaks released it on our behalf. And that's not illegal, only it probably is, because it'll probably be pretty clearly demonstrated what the chain of custody was and who the orders came from. So that's problematic. Why he would say that, I don't know. But the really juicy part, I guess, of the whole thing, I mean, there's no news in the, if we, the reason we're not impeaching him is so we can get Kavanaugh in. I mean, it's great that people are discussing what, is at stake, or what the Republicans are willing to say is at stake publicly in the Kavanaugh nomination. But Paul Ryan admitted as much earlier, and it was just as dumb and just as bad an excuse then when he said it as when Nunes said it, or as it was when we found out Nunes said it last night. The juicier part, though, is the open declaration that it's his view that the role of Republican members of Congress is to protect the president and to shield him from this inquiry when, as we discussed earlier, it really is not. That's perhaps your job as a party operative, but as a member of Congress, you are impermissibly mixing your politics and your government service. And although that's a difficult line to draw, particularly for elected branches of government, there is a pretty clear line there if you are only interested in using the investigative authority of the Congress to improperly steer an investigation in the wrong direction and stymie those outside of your branch, stymie their investigations so that they are unable to come to a true conclusion. That is problematic, and he probably shouldn't have admitted to doing as much, but he's a very stupid person, and these things do happen from time to time. All right, let's see. There's so much more that we can get to, and that deserves our attention, and yet not all of which will make it onto the air here. Let's see. What other things do I need to note for the record? Okay, there's a few things here about what's going on over at the Manafort trial, and a couple of interesting Twitter threads about that, and just sort of clarifying the timeline of what are the agreements executed by Paul Manafort that have landed him in trouble here, and what is Rick Gates giving us on him. Christopher Miller, who is, listed here as correspondent covering Ukraine and Eastern Europe for, RFERL and Press Freedom. I'm afraid I have to tell you right off the bat, I couldn't tell you what RFERL actually stands for, and when I click on it, I hope I will then say, oh, of course. Yes, Radio Free Europe / Radio Liberty. Okay, there we are. I'm not terribly embarrassed not to have remembered that, quite honestly, but there you have it. Anyway, correspondent covering Ukraine and Eastern Europe. So obviously got some great interest here in the Manafort trial. And he was tweeting about this. Let's see, this would have been Tuesday. Rick Gates, started his morning of testimony getting into the gritty details of exactly how much money each Ukrainian billionaire contracted Manafort for, showcasing the amount of money that was flowing into the hidden Cypriot accounts in 2011 and 2012. And remember who else owned a bank in Cyprus? Wilbur Ross. I don't know if they use the same bank. I don't even think that's been alleged anywhere. It's just weird that Cyprus is the clearinghouse for all this stolen money. How much was it? It amounted to at least $5 million, he says. And he's including here the tweet from CNN with a little courtroom sketch of, I guess, Rick Gates on the stand. Rick Gates has taken the stand again in former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort's trial in Alexandria, Virginia. Christopher Miller's coverage and commentary continues. So the scheme, he says, worked like this. Yanukovych's party of regions, that was the then president of Ukraine and the political party he headed and that Manafort worked for. Yanukovych's party of regions and Manafort agreed on the details. A Cyprus law firm drew up the agreement, and then Kilimnik, you remember Konstantin Kilimnik's name came up in all of this stuff earlier on, a close associate of Manafort's working with him at his firm. I believe Kilimnik executed it. So with a link here also to more CNN coverage and a screen grab here that says, in one instance, the payment supported lobbying in the United States, Gates said. The leaders of Ukraine's party of regions would meet with Manafort to craft a budget for their campaigns, then agree to amounts and payment structures, Gates testified. They would then use a law firm in Cyprus to draft the agreements and place contract amounts details into them. Some were signed by the directors of Cypriot companies who on both sides oversaw the accounts. Working for Manafort, the Russian Konstantin Kilimnik would collect the agreements and execute them, Gates said. Manafort reported some of the payments to tax authorities in the U.S. as loans, though they were, in fact, income, Gates said. So lots of interesting things emerging from there and a clearer picture. I just wanted to throw that out there. It's not particularly connected to anything at this point, but just sort of keeping one eye on how much Gates is spilling over there in the Manafort trial and how clear he's making it. And also allegations floating out there, by the way, that much of the subject matter of the contracts between the Party of Regions and Manafort and his associates were for policy help as well. They were helping the Party of Regions formulate national policy. He was running the government of another country on a consulting basis at the same time, or rather, I guess later on, a little bit on down the road, Ukraine is paying him, but he takes the Trump job for free. So I guess should there ever be a conflict as between what the Ukrainians wanted in this and what the Russians wanted, and in this case there wasn't much in the way of conflict, I just wonder which tune does he dance to, the one that's paying him or the one that he's doing quote unquote for free? Sets up a little bit of an issue, don't you think? All right, let's see. A few other things that perhaps we can throw out there just to get on the record, and then maybe after the break, a little discussion of what I'll call, an opportunity to get ourselves in trouble. How about that? We'll just tease it that way. But other things I wanted to throw in there before the break, David Farenthold reported the other day that he had heard that the New York State Attorney General now says that she was already investigating possible emoluments violations by Donald Trump in New York. And the basic story here, at President Trump's hotel in New York, revenue went up this spring thanks to a visit from big spending Saudis. And always a great way to line his pockets to get members of the Middle Eastern ruling families to simply drop millions on terrible food and bad banquet facilities and over-decorated hotel rooms and Trump properties. But that's out there. Hasn't really developed into too much just yet, but I thought we would at least put it on the record. That and, of course, the news out of South Carolina. Of course, you've almost certainly heard the latest about old Todd Kincannon, the old 37-year-old Todd Kincannon, who was formerly the head of South Carolina's Republican Party, and then was basically drummed out of that position under a cloud of scandal. He's a lunatic, and he got himself tossed out, but he used to be a very, very prominent Twitter troll, and now he's gone completely around the bend. Arrested last week after he killed the family dog and reportedly told officers he did so because God commanded him to do so. That's about the furthest out there on the spectrum you can get. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Let's scroll into this one here. I just thought maybe before we headed over into, before we even take up the Todd Kincannon story, let me put on record here just because it looks like a good organized set of thoughts about the subject. The 4 biggest takeaways from that bombshell leaked audio of Representative Devin Nunes from Talking Points memo. Maybe I just want to make sure we didn't miss anything here in terms of big takeaways, but just to put a finer, more organized point on it, perhaps we'll see what they have to say on this one. I'll just get right down to it. The 4 biggest revelations from Nunes' speech. 1, Nunes is worried that without the blind and unconditional protection of a Republican majority, that's a good way of putting it, the president will be in serious legal jeopardy from special counsel Robert Mueller's probe. More excerpts offered here, too. This puts us in such a tough spot. If Sessions won't unrecuse and Mueller won't clear the president, we're the only ones, which is really the danger. We have to keep all these seats. We have to keep the majority. We do not keep the majority. All of this goes away. In other words, here, I guess with a little bit more context, it seems all of this is their ability to clear the president. In other words, whether he deserves it or not, we're the ones that are going to have to do this. And if we don't have that ability, what if people find out the president is guilty of horrible, horrible crimes? Oh, you mean the truth? Well, I don't know. The second big takeaway, though their attempts seem to have petered out for now, there is still will from at least some faction of the Republican caucus to impeach Rosenstein. Let's see. There's the matter of the timing thing. We already heard that excerpt. 3, Nunes stated strongly that a politician disseminating stolen information given to him or her by a foreign entity is a crime, which sounds an awful lot like what the president, his family members, and associates may have done. In his hypothetical, of course, he named Portugal and McRogers, McBean, McMonkey over there as the recipient. Okay, that's not really a huge... Well, I mean, it's an interesting takeaway. And number 4, on a less serious note, even Nunes, one of Trump's most stalwart defenders, sometimes cringes at the president's tweets. Oh, interesting. You have a mixed bag on those tweets, right? Sometimes we love the president's tweets and sometimes we cringe on the president's tweets, but they're trying to make this is all political as to why that story ran the New York Times on the tweets. It's all political as to why that story ran the New York Times on the tweets. Well, okay, so a disjointed speech, off the cuff, making no sense, but he's apparently cringing at the president's tweets. That's the last big takeaway. I'm sorry I wasted your time with that. I thought there would be something a little bit more meaty in all of that. Okay, let's see. I should probably tell you at least the basics of the story of Todd Kincannon, just because, what? You just leave it like that? The former head of the state's Republican Party murdered the dog and said God told him to do it? Yeah, that's the story. Authorities say the former head of South Carolina's Republican Party told them that he killed his mother's dog because God told him to, and that he was the second coming of Jesus Christ. I think he means Todd thinks he's the second coming, not the dog. Although, I guess it's possible that he thought the dog was the second coming of Jesus Christ and that he thought that was a problem, so he killed him. That's what happened to the first coming of Jesus Christ. What's the issue? That worked out pretty well in terms of, founded a church on it and everything. I'm sure Jesus Christ might have thought differently about it at the time, but he seemed pretty willing to go, so maybe, I don't know. What can I tell you? This guy's crazy. I don't know what he's thinking. Yes, Todd Kincannon, 37, arrested last week after he choked, stabbed, and mutilated, just to be sure, his mother's 10-year-old beagle Mix at her Greenville County home, news outlets reported. Kincannon reportedly told Simpsonville police officers that he killed the dog because, quote, there we are, now that straightens it out, I'm the second coming of Christ, and I got a command from God to do it. Well, okay. Officers who responded to the July 26th call said Kincannon came out of his parents' home wearing only his underwear, hooray, and was covered in blood and dog hair. Oh, what a sight. According to one officer, Kincannon said that every 1,000 years there needs to be a sacrifice and blood must be spilt. I guess he's just that ill. An incident report noted that Kincannon held up injuries to his arm and wrist, which an officer said were likely from a dog bite, and said, I have a sign. I am about to get crucified in the media. Yeah, he understands that much. Authorities said Kincannon will be charged with animal cruelty after evaluation at a mental hospital. It wasn't known if he had an attorney. The Republican activist briefly served as general counsel and executive director for the state GOP in 2009. In 2015, Kincannon was charged with criminal domestic violence after threatening to kill himself, his wife, and her family. Later that year, his law license was suspended following threatening emails he sent to people in connection with that arrest. In connection with the 2015 case, a grand jury indicted Kincannon on domestic violence and kidnapping charges last year. Both charges are still pending. This won't do him any favors when he goes on trial for that one. And, the guy's just a loon, but the South Carolina Republican Party put him up at the top, and I can't really explain why that happened, but it did. And, by the way, how do you think he threatened to kill himself, his wife, and her family? We think forcing them to climb a dangerous and unsafe ladder, forcing them into a swimming pool, something like that, maybe. I have a feeling that in South Carolina, the answer might have been to go to the gun. But hey, who knows for sure. Okay, here's a great way to get ourselves in trouble, as I said, and take up a discussion that I probably shouldn't, but will anyway. And I say I probably shouldn't, not because this is going to be very delicate. And the reason it'll get us in trouble, and I want to warn you ahead of time, what I'm doing here with this thing, don't jump the gun. Just consider for now. This is a piece that calls into question, let's say, the motivations of, you're not going to like it, of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and does so in a way that is, I cannot vouch for the accusations. I don't know anything about them, but I am assuming that the reporting is done straight and done well. And I saw a little bit of a discussion with the author online when this was pointed out to me, and I have no reason to believe that the reporting was done poorly. However, you might come to different conclusions about the same information. And of course, even if it was reported with all of the ordinary journalistic standards prevailing, you can still, of course, get biased or even bad information from documented sources. But I think there's a lot to this. Some of the accusations, I think, would stand to reason, and some, I think, are just good spin or bad spin on a true fact that I think if almost anybody were vetted this way, you could find ways to undermine claims that they make about themselves. And I also think this reveals an awful lot about the intricacies of internal democratic politics that happen in many ways in New York and in New York City in particular, in ways that they do not happen everywhere, and in a few other places, very few other places. our local Democratic politics exactly like this, but it seems like an accurate reflection to me of my understanding of the way some of these things do sometimes happen. It's very interesting, and it's offered for that reason. My personal view of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I don't know I have one. I mean, sounds like an exciting person, clearly raising a lot of interest in Democratic politics. I didn't care one way or the other, really, about Crowley, and it doesn't disturb me in the least that he's lost his bid for renomination. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez strikes me as somebody who's certainly extraordinarily enthusiastic, knows a great deal more, I think, about just, the nitty-gritty of at least her local Democratic politics than most candidates for office who are similarly inexperienced. So, I mean, I think she actually comes at it from a fairly, a little bit better informed place than a lot of other candidates. I've seen some clueless candidates, ultimately, it's like, I'm not a huge fan of hers either, but nothing about her winning over Crowley disturbs me. And the fact that it excites a local Democratic base is a good thing. And I have no objections to her campaigning around the country for other candidates, even though it's a little bit awkward to do so in primaries. But that's kind of where she's coming from. And that's the activity she's engaged in. And you're not going to be able to build a power base if you are indeed one day interested in a leadership position or just interested in building a movement. You're not going to be able to do it by sitting back and saying, I'll take whoever shows up in Congress and talk to them then. You got to get involved early and try and build a base for yourself inside the Democratic caucus. And this is the only way she could do it. She had this opportunity. She got all the media attention. She became a hot property. She should strike while the iron's hot, campaign for other candidates, and do this thing. Now, hopefully she'll be on board and interested and willing to campaign for Democratic nominees in the general election cycle later on, where they can benefit from her presence, and that will be up to the local candidates to decide. But this inquiry also raises another possibility that's much talked about among her doubters, at the very least, and especially, of course, and I know it's a sensitive subject, among the Bernie Sanders doubters, and they're legitimate questions, though they will be viewed as attacks and very disturbing ones at that. There is some question that arises from the fact that Bernie Sanders does not make a regular practice and is not interested in making a regular practice of affiliating officially with the Democratic Party. Is that a huge problem? Not always, but the recent run for the White House highlights and exacerbates those problems because, of course, if you're going to run as a Democrat, well, I think it's well within every Democrat would be well within their rights to have questions about why it is that you haven't been active and why it is that you immediately went back to distancing yourself from the party once you didn't get that one thing that you wanted out of them immediately. It does speak to a certain, it could certainly be spun as a certain lack of patience. But on the other hand, in Bernie Sanders' case personally, there's the mitigating factor that, well, he's been at this for an awfully long time, and I don't think that he's the kind of person that you could accurately describe as being extraordinarily impatient. But there are others who are on this ride along with him, about whom we have no such record and no such indication. All right, I should get right down to it, and I should start out by telling you it's on Medium. The author identified here as Portless Glam, which leads me to suppose that perhaps it's not the person's real name. So, you take it with a certain grain of salt. Medium, I'm always a little bit wary of because I just don't know where the people are coming from. It's not like reading something out of the New York Times, holding itself to journalistic standards, whatever, even if you're talking about an opinion piece. All right, here we go. Let's dive in. Not here for progress is the title. Meet the Tea Party-esque insurgency seeking to, quote, rebuild the Democratic Party from scratch. Right off the bat, the invocation of the Tea Party, likely to rub people the wrong way, but I think that's not a new comparison. One that's been made elsewhere, and one that sometimes gets made even by people within that movement, saying, well, we approach things with the same energy and fervor, but not necessarily from the same place. Though there are others who have doubts about the Bernie Sanders affiliated wing of the Democratic Party, and one, whether they're really and truly democratically affiliated, and two, how close they might really be with the Tea Party and people who populate it. It's controversial. Hostile candidates and shady PACs are posing as progressive Democrats in the 2018 election, exploiting DNC voter data and driving party division. It's a burnt to the ground strategy that foreign cyber attackers are all too eager to assist with. And I will start off by saying, yes, I believe that that's the case, that foreign cyber attackers are all too eager to assist with. The open question there is, does anybody know it or intend for that to be the case who is actively working in it? And I cannot answer that just yet. There's evidence for both. Over a few short months, a media blitz has transformed the little-known Bronx congressional candidate Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez into the fresh new face of progressive politics in America. That's the good spin. I like that spin. However, independent research into her background and funding has revealed Democratic socialist, and here enclosed in scary scare quotes, Ocasio-Cortez is neither a progressive Democrat nor a good faith candidate. I don't know about that. It's certainly painful to consider that as a possibility, and I think it may overstate the case and is a matter of, I'm sure, of some dispute, and it depends kind of what biases you come in here with. I just want to throw this out there without getting too deep into the analysis, but only because we are running low on time. But I want it out there, and we'll do some more analysis about it in the days to come, though possibly not tomorrow. Maybe this was a bad time to pick this up. Let's continue, though. And for someone with an economics degree, one of the only claims on her resume that checks out, the 28-year-old candidate has a lot to learn about campaign finance and election law. Well, economics degree doesn't tell you anything about campaign finance or election law, really. The beginning part of this, by the way, seems to, I really actually kind of want to focus on a different part of it. But there's some open challenges to her resume, which, one, I think I'll actually skip over because I can't really speak to, how closely her resume reflects anything. But I will also say candidates all over the place on the spectrum and of all types are essentially, these campaigns are essentially, you're in the business of putting at least the best spin on your resume. There are an awful lot of people in office and seeking office who have behind them, because most people have behind them, a string of failures, essentially, or a string of experiences that you probably describe to yourself, if you think you're being honest with yourself, as relative failures. However, of course, the job here is to put yourself in the best possible light. So, I mean, politics and every other endeavor in life are chock full of people who say things like, well, my resume says, mine doesn't, but my resume could say, for instance, we'll do hypothetically. My resume could say, I'm the chairman and CEO of KITM Media LLC. I'm not. I never formed a KITM Media LLC, but I could certainly do that, and I could do that in an afternoon, and I'd name myself CEO and president. I'm founder and CEO. And so, that goes on my resume. I'm a founder and CEO. But in reality, KITM Media LLC is this couple $100 worth of equipment that I actually had somebody else's help in buying initially, some of which I've replaced myself. It's in the kitchen of my house, and I make a podcast. And it's not even a tremendously successful podcast, to be quite honest. I'm glad you all love it, and thank you, every single one of you, for your support. There's been a new wave of Patreon donors, whom I really must thank. But it's not bringing in the millions or anything like it, right? So CEO and founder makes it sound like I'm a tech whiz or something like that, and I'm making millions of dollars. You know how many stupid ideas are out there with valuations in the billions, and it could be the case that I've got that. It isn't. You just put these spins on things. I do a podcast. If I say on my resume, I do a podcast in my kitchen, that doesn't look like anything. But founder and CEO, KITM Media LLC, I'm in the podcasting space. I'm exploring synergies across multiple platforms, etc. You know, you put all the spin you can on it, right? Okay, so most of her work experience, not particularly glamorous. There is that. And I don't put a great deal of stock in the fact that, you know, in 28 years, she hasn't done a whole hell of a lot. I hadn't either. And I'd pretty much probably present myself more or less the same way. I think the more interesting part of it is her involvement in various civic groups and political movements in her area, and really what kind of, affiliations she's made in the time since working for Bernie Sanders and then opting to run for office. Really more about the people surrounding her, to be honest. Okay, let me skip down to this portion here. It's titled, So Who Vetted Ocasio-Cortez? Although I really don't know why that's the title of the section. After serving as a volunteer field organizer for Bernie Sanders in 2016, Ocasio-Cortez was recruited by Justice Democrats. And I'm really more interested in the Justice Democrats thing than anything else here, to be honest. A hostile, it's described here, and shady, described here, this is their words, hostile and shady PAC launched in 2017 by the Young Turks scandal-plagued creator, although a lot of people I think in the audience might agree, Cenk Uygur. Is that how he pronounced it? Uygur? I've never really been entirely sure about that, but you know who I'm talking about, and Saikat Chakrabarti, the former director of organizing technology for Sanders' campaign. So, Justice Democrats is their project. Justice Democrats are closely affiliated with Brand New Congress, another PAC launched by Chakrabarti in April of 2016, alongside former senior Sanders advisor Zach Exley, whom we know from Twitter and elsewhere, and former Sanders campaign coordinator Corbin Trent, about whom I know nothing, somehow. Both Justice Democrats and Brand New Congress were founded with the goal of harnessing the momentum and fundraising muscle of the Sanders campaign. A review of the core staff reveals significant crossover and a musical chairs of board members between the two. Not unusual. After all, you found these things with your friends and coworkers and colleagues moving on from the Sanders campaign. That shouldn't surprise anyone. Ocasio-Cortez assumed a leadership role with Justice Democrats sometime in 2017, thereby effectively vetting herself for the role of candidate. Now, that's an interesting point. If her rise to prominence and her surprise victory were largely fueled by her association with, endorsement by, and underwriting by Justice Democrats, their PAC, Brand New Congress, their PAC, etc., what you have here is and again, this also not unique, but when we see it, we always kind of say, interesting. Well, clever, usually not illegal, and not even necessarily all that dishonest, but always sort of I see, interesting and clever. You form a PAC, you raise money for the PAC, you help organize the PAC, and then you run for office and you are immediately endorsed by the PAC, and all of the money that you raised around the country saying, we need candidates to, who are going to stand up for XYZ. I mean, obviously, on the one hand, it's like, well, we weren't necessarily thinking you. But on the other hand, if you're the person doing that campaigning and convincing people that we need candidates for Congress who are going to be able to do X, Y, and Z, if you're successful at it, in the main, probably people would probably say, well, what about I wish the candidates were like you. So it may very well be the case that plenty, or even the majority, or even all of the donors are perfectly happy with her running and getting the endorsement of the of Justice Democrats. I bring this up because we've been through a couple of minor fights lately where, for instance, we find a difference of opinion between Bernie Sanders' wing of the Democratic Party and progressives and traditional progressives and traditional liberals and establishment Democrats, whatever you want to call them, over a primary campaign for a congressional seat. And one side is backing the upstart new candidate from the progressive side, and the other one is accused of being establishment, tired, hack, whatever, whether it's an incumbent or just someone who comes from that side of things. And I know I've seen a couple of fights of late in which the upstart progressive Sanders wing types were accusing the establishment types of some sort of impropriety insofar as the establishment candidate was running with the endorsement of one or another establishment PACs. And I don't remember what it was, a Planned Parenthood person. I think it might have been a Planned Parenthood person, or maybe even Emily's List or something similar, but who was running and got the endorsement of this very important organization and the money from this very important organization, and lots of it, more than they usually give to any candidate or had historically given to any candidate ever. But conveniently was being bestowed upon the person who was the previous executive director of this organization. And isn't that suspicious, and isn't that corrupt and horrific, et cetera, et cetera? And the answer is, well, no, I would assume that they would absolutely back that person. The reason that person was their political director to begin with was because they trusted that person's political instincts implicitly. The fact that they're now standing for Congress, what would you do? Of course you would go all in, more than you ever had, for the chance to put someone in Congress who you trusted so implicitly and who would doubtless have your best interests at heart, and no better representative could possibly be elected. Of course, the same argument could then therefore be made by Justice Democrats. Who would Justice Democrats trust more than Ocasio-Cortez? Of course they would endorse her. Of course they would back her. But it is interesting how, when the shoe is on the other foot, things can come to look. We are up against our time limit here, and I knew, I guess, going into this that we wouldn't really be able to deep dive into this thing. But I want to put that one out there and on the record for you to take a look at. And maybe it's best that we don't discuss it on the air that deeply, because this is something that you should read and consider carefully. I hope I've given you an idea of the framework within which I'd like you to read this thing. And there's some very interesting alternative explanations for the Ocasio-Cortez candidacy and success that have to do with internal Democratic New York City politics and Democratic clubs, which don't exist in outside of, really, for the most part, really inner city settings. Big eastern cities, maybe New York, maybe Chicago, tend to have these Democratic clubs, and there's just not nearly as much organization and enthusiasm for their outside in the suburbs. But essentially, there are a network of these clubs, some more progressive than others, and rivalries exist among them, and it is entirely possible, as is alleged in the story later on, that political enemies of Joe Crowley were more interested in the Ocasio-Cortez race, not so much because of their dedication to a new kind of progressive politics, but rather because of their continuing dedication to the old-style backstabbing politics. But the back being stabbed this time was that of Joe Crowley, who is, of course, the head of a different and rival Democratic club in New York City. And it all comes down to a sort of gangs of New York-style warfare. Works out well enough, I suppose, for the opponents, but and whether or not they'll find out later that the enemy of their enemy is or isn't their friend, I do not know. But another interesting twist on things, not to mention the intertwining of brand new Congress, Justice Democrats, and the disturbing tendency in both parties, unfortunately, yes, both sides do it, of using the proceeds from these PACs not so much to support candidates of like mind, but rather to support the consultants whose job it is to sign on as clients, candidates of like mind, and pay themselves out of the PAC. And, well, the accusation stands here in the Medium piece that is pretty much what happened to every dollar, more or less, raised by Justice Democrats in brand new Congress. Not a new phenomenon. Not the first ones to do it, not the first Democrats to do it, not the first progressives to do it, but it's worth thinking about if you thought you were joining that movement to get dark, big, behind-the-scenes money out of politics.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com, you have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
All right, so that wasn't the best way to handle it, but okay, there's more to come. Justice will be bringing you the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy next, and let's see what we can get in there. Oh, there's a Wilbur Ross story here. Let's see, a van filled with migrant mothers separated from their children crashed, and an ICE lied about it. Everybody's lying about everything today. It must be a Trump thing.